So, what comic book is the most successful event of all time? Which one caused the most profit, the most attention, the most long term success for comic companies? It's actually a tricky question. Hey, everybody, this is Perch. There's some mathematical, I guess, financial ways you can actually prove this question out of what's the most successful event of all time or event book. And if you're doing a lot of, I mean, if you're this is where how you get to the math comes into play a little bit because I think if you adjust for inflation and you take a look at kind of the revenue dollars that came in with marketing and with promotions and with tie-in, then probably Secret Wars, the original Secret Wars, probably comes at the top of that list for the most successful. But that's doing some weird math. That's really taking into account, like I said, inflation. It's taking into account what the comics were sold for. It's taking into account the toy deals that were signed and the merchandise that was attached to that, which was quite lucrative. There's a lot of elements that play into that. And so it's not necessarily a fair comparison. I've heard people argue that Secret Invasion was the most successful event of all time based on financial numbers and kind of how things have gone. I would say, for my own personal answer, if and I'll try and explain why the math gets the way I do. I think there's kind of two quote unquote events or marketing initiatives for comics that I think were probably the most successful, but they're weighted by modern times. So the first, and I think I can make a very strong case, is Civil War, the initial Civil War comic. Now, why do I say this? Well, one, it was a sales beast just in and of itself. It sold extremely well. It was direct market, so people will point to the 80s when you had the newsstand and point to comics that sold more. But Civil War did not have returnability. It had multiple printings. It had multiple trades. It had a lot of sell through. And today, some people make the argument, a dumb argument on social media that, well, a lot of these comics aren't being sold. That there's mountains and mountains and mountains and mountains of comics in the back door, in the back room that are not selling through to customers. First of all, that's not an accurate portrayal of what's going on in comic stores by any stretch of the imagination. But the other side of that is comics are not. I mean, Civil War is go to a comic shop and try and pick up Civil War. There may be some back issues that are heavily marked up that you can find, but you're not going to find boxes of Civil War just sitting around. You're not going to find Civil War comics in the dollar bin. This was a successful comic. And on top of that, here comes kind of the X factor of why this would be my argument is Civil War for Marvel at least set up a significant amount of storylines and spin-offs and successful books with the Avengers and with Iron Man in particular that really spawned a good 5 to 6 year run. You could make a argument that Secret Invasion, Dark Reign, all of those titles that Marvel and those eras that Marvel went through were a result of what Civil War teed up. It gave Marvel the opportunity to bring Captain America back to life. It gave them the opportunity to tear down Iron Man and build it back up again. From a pure comic that spawned a lot of different things, Civil War, I believe, is probably the most successful event from a financial tie-in, with just comics. Again, like I mentioned earlier, Secret War had the toy deal. It had merchandise that were tied into that, and that is a whole other ballgame. But Civil War, I think, in terms of what it did for the comics, and I think you can make an argument of what it did for the movies. Civil War, the movie, was a linchpin in Phase 2 or Phase 3. Phase 2, I guess. I think Civil War is Phase 2. The way they count, I don't know, but if you think about the movies, without Civil War, without having what happened with Iron Man and Captain America, and that split and everything else, it teed up a lot of films. It teed up kind of the dynamic of Captain Marvel. It teed up Infinity War. There's just a lot that went on there. So this one story, this one event, I think is probably the most successful. And if you think about Marvel in particular over the last 30 years or so, that single event, that single moment is a kind of a linchpin to comics that you've seen replicated very, very rarely. I think you could make the argument that if House of X, Powers of X, that Hickman storyline does not collapse in and on itself with all the tie-ins and storylines, and if it does make the transition over to being a template for the movies with Kevin Feige, then I think that could be another one. But anyway, that's kind of what I think there for Marvel. For DC, it's tougher, I think, because DC has had a number of successful events, critical events. By the way, everything I'm saying here is not my personal favorite story to read. I didn't mind some war. I thought it was a fine story. But I think, where Marvel's concerned, I have a definite soft spot in my heart for the original Secret Wars. I thought what Hickman did for the new Secret Wars was solid in terms of just a good story to read. There's a lot of good kind of Marvel events. I think Craven's Last Hunt is a great one. I mean, there's a lot of things like that that I really enjoy. I'm talking from a financial successful standpoint, not what I personally necessarily enjoy. And so when you get to DC, things like Blackest Night, I really enjoyed that series. I enjoyed the original Crisis quite a bit. I thought that was a good story with a lot of good things going on. The Lazarus Contract. I think there's a lot of good stories throughout DC's history. But if I'm talking about the event or moment that was probably the most successful for them in terms of a shot in the arm, the weird to say, the New 52 reboot and launch was financially quite successful for DC, and it did a lot for them in terms of putting their universe in a new spot, doing a lot of merchandise. I mean, what a lot of people I think forget or don't realize where the New 52 is concerned is alongside that reboot, they basically teed up a very clean slate for T-shirts and merchandise and toys and socks and underwear and everything else that if you went to a Walmart or a Target, and you can even still go today, you will see versions of Superman in his New 52 costume, and you'll realize that this was kind of a springboard for a lot of cash that came into DC. It really did provide their merchandise a huge shot in the arm. And for that matter, you look at characters like Batman, who, Batman's always successful, but you look at what happened to Batman following the New 52, following what Snyder did in relaunching that character, if you will. And that was a major, I mean, Batman went to another level of attention. Harley Quinn, you have Batman Day, you have these things that have happened with DC as a result of the New 52 launch. Now, obviously, I mean, again, as a fan, I think not all things were great with the New 52 by a mile. And I think as time has gone on, the New 52 rose and then dropped. So it wasn't all happiness and daisies. It definitely went in a darker direction after that. But what it did for the company, it's still generating a lot for the company, even now, many, many years later, even though they've walked away from the New 52, have done Rebirth. I mean, from a fan perspective, I very much enjoyed what they did with Rebirth. From a business profit, merchandising, getting DC Comics into the public consciousness, I mean, New 52 got the ball rolling in many ways for DC to start talking about their cinematic universe. And the New 52 kind of, ending with a whimper, and the DC EU, their cinematic universe kind of, ending poorly as well. They lined it all up and then they missed. It's like having a great football team that just collapses in third and fourth quarter. As a longtime Denver Broncos fan, that is something I'm all too aware of. Anyway, I think from a profit, that's probably where I'd stick DC in that zone. So those are probably the most successful events, I would say, or quote unquote events, moments of that have happened from a business perspective. Obviously, that does not align, like I said, to what we like creatively and how all that stuff goes down. But it is interesting to look at these comics and kind of get a read on what worked for the company, because I think that informs us a little bit in terms of what's going to happen in the future. How are comics going to continue to evolve? If DC wants to have their next, big event or big moment, what's it going to look like? Well, it probably needs to look a lot like the New 52, honestly. Not in terms of a reboot and some of the other shenanigans that went on during there, but definitely in terms of kind of how their universe was cleaned up and then served as a very appealing package to connect with. I think that's a big deal. Anyway, those are my thoughts. What are yours? Both, and I'd like your opinion both creatively. What events did you love? What sticks out in your mind as a really cool thing that you remember? And then also from your perspective, what was the most financially successful? What do you remember just getting a lot of attention in the comic shop, or wherever you happen to be? What do you remember when you went into the Walmarts and the Targets and things like that in terms of what was a big deal with the comics? What was there for you? I would love to hear your thoughts on the matter. Leave a comment below. Like and subscribe. Always appreciate when you do that. Follow me over on Twitter if you want to ask me some questions or get my take on things. This topic came from a listener question, so I love those and always happy to have them. Bring them on by, and thanks for listening.